All right, so next week, your midterm is going to be due. So let me actually just change this real quick. So next Friday, your midterm will be due, and I'm going to post it for you. So we won't be taking the midterm in class. You'll be doing it like take-home style. It's just going to be a lot easier that way, not only logistically, but also the things I kind of want you to do are going to take at least a little bit of time. So I imagine your midterm will take you probably, if you really stretch it out, close to 2 hours total. Now, it's not going to be like, writing tons and tons of essays and all that, but you're going to have to, say, keep score. You're going to have to be able to, rehash the different things we talked about with like the philosophy of the game. If you go into your path on Loud Cloud, we're going to cover everything up through topic 7 is going to be on there. And since it is going to be take home, I'm not going to review with you guys because you'll have ample opportunity to, look up answers or do anything like that. The writing assignment they have here is for offensive skills and strategies. We're going to cover that next week. So if you want to get started on it, you can, but it's not going to be due for 2 weeks. So that's that. Any questions on that so far? Perfect. All right, today I want to hopefully finish up with our discussion on hitting and base running. So there's a couple things I wanted to go over with this. We started talking about swing mechanics last week, and I wanted to kind of elaborate on that a little bit. I posted in the announcements PowerPoint for you and an article on swing mechanics. But I wanted to start off with this here. So this is an older research study, I believe it's back from like 1995, going over the mechanics of the swing. And it breaks it down pretty well, especially through the biomechanic events of it. So that's kind of what I wanted to go over with this one in particular. So when you look at this here, you'll see, if you can read it, this bit here. So this is your maximum segmental velocities during the course of the swing or a baseball swing. When you look at any sort of mechanical analysis in terms of velocity, you always break it down into its component segments. You don't really ever take the whole process and assign it one value. You assign each segmental component a value. If you notice here, this BLMRV, that's bat lag maximum rotational velocity, meaning this is how fast your bat moves from here to contact. So essentially this from the bat being from here to there, that's what that max velocity is for that. That's at 1588 degrees, which is pretty fast, relatively speaking. However, the fastest movement in sports is the max internal rotation a pitcher has. So when a pitcher goes from max external rotation, where the arm would be cocked back, to internal rotation, which is just immediately prior to release, that's at about 8 to 12,000 RPM. So 1588, 10,000. So you see how much faster a pitcher moves relative to a hitter. And it makes sense because a hitter is only reacting. A hitter is not essentially proactive in their approach. Pitchers are proactive. They dictate where, usually where the ball goes, and the hitter has no say in it, right? So needless to say, the hitting mechanics or the hitting speed is on the whole going to be considerably slower than what you see with pitching. It makes sense, right? Now, what's more kind of interesting here is when you start looking at force production. So when you measure force, you measure it in newtons. If you wanted to equate that to, like, say, pound force, it would be approximately 4.5 times less. The total force we have here is about 1,000 newtons. And then when you actually make ball contact, your total force is about 700 newtons. And again, just to give you the conversion here, so about 157 pounds of force. That's not that much, relatively speaking. I mean, you think of lifting 150 pounds of weight, and yeah, that's taxing, but for most all apparently healthy college-age students, 150 pounds isn't that much when you take that into consideration. So if you're really not generating that much force with your bat, how do you hit a home run?
The velocity of the pitch helps.
Yeah, considerably. This doesn't take into account anything of what the pitch brings to the table, which is obviously a huge component to it. Now, granted, when you get into the elite levels of the game, like Major League Baseball, hitters have enough power to where they only need minimal amount of velocity from the ball to really hit it out. This is why you can say take like a soft toss or even a tee, ball placed on a tee, for example, and still have usually enough power for most people to hit a home run. So say roughly 330 plus feet, depending on where you're locating it. You're not going to hit 500 feet, bombs off of a tee, or even when you're soft tossing kind of thing, because there's not enough energy generated from the ball to then have you as a hitter then make it go that far. You need to have some sort of statistically significant velocity attached to the ball to really hit it to those upper echelons of, distance kind of thing. Does that kind of make sense? And that's why I said last week that when you're a pitcher, and we'll talk more about this when we get into more of the pitching mechanics, that if you're throwing very slow or very fast, you tend to have at least moderate levels of success. It's those in the middle values, like that 76 to 84 mile an hour point, where you're in real trouble, because that gives the batter too much time to be able to react to a pitch and enough velocity to where it allows the batter to generate enough force to hit that ball a long way. If you throw a ball slower, yes, they may have more reaction time, but you're not generating as much or providing as much readily available force or energy in the ball. And typically you're not throwing a ball at a very low velocity that's going to go straight. It's going to definitely be a gravity ball, drop off. Or you look at something like, say, a knuckleball, where the ball's thrown with no rotation or very little rotation, and due to drag and wind displacement, the ball dances or jiggles around. Very hard to hit something that is moving in unpredictable motions or unpredictable fashions. So point of it is that, relatively speaking, batters don't generate that much force. Pitchers do the majority of the work for them. I'll post, this is a dissertation on the mechanics of a baseball swing. And what I wanted to show from this here are these different biomechanical markers here. Oh, and I should mention that, granted, this was a 95 study, but it was using data from 1993 from the Montreal Expos, so a team that's no longer in existence. Although in the strike-shortened 94 season, it is worth noting that the Expos were the best team in baseball at the time. So unfortunately, they never won a World Series, but the one year they had the chance, you know, they decided they wanted more money, which, okay, I guess I can understand that. All right, when we look at the mechanics here, and we've talked about this a little bit before, stride length, stride direction, your lead foot placement, your trail knee flexion, lead knee flexion, rotational movements, all these we've talked about before. One thing I want to point out with this is your lead foot and the stride direction. Generally speaking, you have 3 batting stances on which you can base your swing. You can have an open stance, and an open stance is where you have your lead foot being outside of your bat foot. So your bat foot is always going from a right-handed batter, my bat foot is going to be my back leg. So right-handed batter, right foot is always obviously back. So if it is outside of that open stance, I can be in alignment or have a neutral stance, and I can be closed off or in front of that back leg and have a closed stance. What's the purpose of having a particular opening or closing of your stance?
I think it's mostly on like comfort, right?
Somewhat. I mean, obviously, you do want to be comfortable at the plate. What else?
If you're someone that opens up their hips when they stride, it can be a good idea to have a closed off stance. That way, when you open up, you kind of bring it back to neutral.
Okay, so you make the point there that you essentially are going to kind of accommodate for how your actual stride goes, or you're going to, oh, what's the word? Not counteract. I mean, that is one of them, but compensate. There we go. You're going to compensate for what you do, because remember, if you open your hips up, you've lost all of your lower half force. Now, yes, you want to open your hips when you make contact because you want to generate or transfer all that lower body force upward. But if I am striding open, I've already lost virtually all of my lower extremity force production, and my bat's still at the starting position. Not a good proposition, right? In terms of your bat speed when you get to, again, like the upper levels of the game, is pretty much the same for everyone. Now, your bat speed is going to change based on, pitch speed, but if everyone is being fed the same, or you analyze bat speed relative to the same velocity of a pitch, it's going to be virtually the same. The reaction time is what differs potentially greatly. I'm going to get into that in a minute here. But when we are doing any sort of changes with our stance opening or closing, yes, it does go into comfort, but it also goes into how we can then appropriately get to our endpoint, which is foot landing. So, you have your stride forward, or even if you bring your foot up, even if you don't even stride at all, even if you just lean back and go forward, you still are doing a stride. It's a transfer of weight from back side to front side. Does that make sense? If I start open and you just kind of look at me, what do you see in my face?
Both eyes.
Yeah, and why is that important?
As a hitter,
Yeah,
you can track the ball better.
yeah, I can see everything. If I have a closed stance, now what? And again, I'm definitely over-exaggerating here, but if I'm throwing, or if you're throwing to me, now what do you notice?
It's kind of like you're kind of like limited in what you can see.
Yeah, I mean, you look, and I am essentially taking my left eye and staring at you. My right eye is, obviously bifocal vision, I'm gonna be able to see you with that, but essentially I'm looking at you with one eye, right? As opposed to here, complete two eyes. Here, you see the difference. How much of a difference does that actually make?
I guess that makes a huge difference for just general depth perception.
In effect, yes. Now, granted, like we were saying before, it does go into the whole comfort bit level there. But at the same time, the more I am able to have both eyes on the ball and focus on that, the easier it is for tracking and scanning. When you're talking about straight fastballs, like if you're just throwing a four-seam fastball, straight fastball, it really doesn't matter. Because what's the action of a four-seam fastball?
Straight.
Straight. I mean, easy, right? There's very little you have to calculate, essentially, with mechanics when you're swinging. It's just straight. Very easy to hit, relatively speaking. What about if I throw a curveball?
A lot of movement on it.
Yeah, typically you look at a curveball going up, down. A slider, you look going, relatively speaking, left, right, or sideways, horizontal movement. Something like a changeup can be very, very tricky because if you throw, like, say, a straight change, you're essentially throwing a slow fastball. Or you're throwing a ball that mimics what a fastball would look like, but with almost a hidden loss in velocity. So instead of seeing, oh, this is a four-seam fastball, all of a sudden I'm way out in front and the ball's not even there yet. Or you look at something like a traditional circle changeup that's going to tail away from the hand of the pitcher. Anytime you have a pitch moving, tracking and scanning becomes much more important. Now, it's not practical as a hitter to say, well, if I close my stance, I can leave my hips closed longer and therefore hit, on average, a fastball much better, because is the pitcher on the mound signaling his pitches to you? I mean, hopefully not, right? I mean, I've seen it before, but at the same time, it's usually not, the pitcher's usually not in the best headspace there if they're just saying, screw it, let's go for it. So you can't, be making those predictions or assumptions like that. Now, it doesn't mean that a closed stance is terrible. Like you were saying, you can use that to compensate for if I open up. If I start my hips closed and I know that my stride is going to bring me open, well, if it starts closed and I go open, now I'm in neutral. I'm still okay. It doesn't help if I'm starting neutral or starting with an open stance and then striding out or opening up. That's going to be making something bad worse. When it comes to bat speed, no stance matters. It doesn't matter how you approach it. Bat speed stays relatively the same. Reaction time is going to change greatly. If you are, say, looking at hitting a ball that is located in the middle inside half of the plate. So if you take the plate, cut it in half, and if you're a right-handed batter, everything that is that half toward you, you have to have a considerably faster reaction time to be able to hit the ball, and not only hit the ball, but hit it well, than if the ball is outside. Because think of our basic mechanics. I am leading with my handle and then swinging the barrel through. Well, for the barrel itself to get to the inside part of the plate, that is the longest it has to travel. So two things happen. Time slows down, or I should say delays, because you're slower, or it takes a longer amount of time to get the barrel to the inside part of the plate. But if you do successfully get it there, you get it there with much more power, much more force than you do if it's, say, swinging at an outside pitch. Because you are at the kind of zenith of your swing. You have transferred all that energy, and now that barrel is here on the middle inward part of the plate, most amount of energy available to hit. The highest amount of the fastest exit velocities for contact come middle end. If you look at an outside pitch we're saying is the outer one half of the plate. Think about how your bat reacts to an outside pitch. Let's say you're just striding neutral forward and I go to swing at an outside pitch. Where am I going to make contact with that? Like, where's the ball going to be relative to where I am?
Much deeper, like closer to your right hip.
Yeah. So if this is home plate here, I'm a right-handed batter, an outside pitch obviously is going to go somewhere out here. If I'm swinging out there, I'm making contact with it when my barrel is still back. My barrel's not out in front of me. What does that say about force production?
You don't get that whip of the barrel from snapping your wrists.
So what does that mean?
Usually you won't be hitting the ball as hard.
Exactly. That's why when anyone hits an opposite field home run, it's always, like golf clap for that, because that takes a lot of force production on the batter's part to be able to do that. Now, granted, like I said, if you're throwing 100 miles an hour on the outside portion of the plate, as a pitcher, you generate much of that force. But still, because you are not able to get all of your force or all of your momentum carried to its apex, you are swinging or hitting the ball at essentially a disadvantage. If there were no adjustments to be made in baseball, so if batters had to stay exactly where they were kind of thing, couldn't change anything, a pitcher should theoretically only throw outside, because that will cause the battery to have the least amount of power available. Now, because batteries can make adjustments and because pitchers aren't machines, that's not possible. But you see how throwing inside or middle inside is inherently bad if you take it from the straight physics perspective, because that is the area that the battery has the most force production in theory. All right, so we're good there. Now, I want to go back to a couple of these swings here. There we go. All right, and see, this is Albert Pujols coming up. Okay, couple things. So he's already started in his swing. But if you notice, his front foot is already landed. So it's already down. He's starting a swing. It's closed off. If his front foot's closed off, what does that mean? Why? His hips are closed. You cannot keep your front foot closed. So meaning your toe cannot stay at less than a roughly 45-degree angle. So if I point my toe straight at you, that would be at 90 degrees relative to my starting stance, which is neutral. So from here to there, 90 degrees, okay? So if I put my toe at 45 degrees, so splitting the difference, my foot is still relatively closed. I can't rotate my hips without putting immense strain on my knees with my foot closed. This is kind of like why, say, Tiger Woods has had so many problems with his legs and why he actually like broke his leg swinging once. And it's because he has such a closed stance that in his swing, he drives with such force and keeps his front side closed the entire time that he actually puts just way too much force into his front leg, which is what causes much of his problems that he has. I mean, it's just a byproduct of being too good, right? But when that front foot's closed, you cannot have your hips open or else you're going to put way too much strain on your knees. Anytime you look at someone's back foot, why is it that you always see the heel leave the ground?
I feel like to create that like rotational energy back foot, you can't just keep it firmly planted.
It's just to be able to rotate. You have to put that back foot up. You have to get that heel off the ground to provide clearance for rotation. Even just, with you sitting there, keep your right foot completely on the ground and try to turn it. And how easy is it to turn it? Now take your heel off and turn. Much, much easier, right? The other thing too, we're not really considering, but we have to, is what is he wearing on his feet?
Cleats.
Cleats. And what are the characteristics of cleats? They have spikes in them, right? For all intents and purposes. Well, that is going to be great for holding you in place. Anytime you are digging something into the ground, you generate what's known as inertia. Inertia is resistance to movement. It's like if you've ever tried to, say, pull a stump out of the ground, or even just pull a well-rooted plant out of the ground. Those roots hold it in place. It doesn't matter when you pull it out that the root's like only, not even pencil thickness. It holds that into place, or it holds the plant into place, making it very difficult to uproot it. It takes a lot of energy to get that out, or it takes a lot of effort to get that root out. Same thing with cleats. When your cleats are in the ground, they hold you in place. So if you try to rotate with them in the ground, you're essentially working against yourself to do that. So you have to lift the back heel up in order to rotate properly. All right, at actual contact here. Both of his arms are bent. Well, I shouldn't say arms, both of his elbows are bent or flexed. This again goes into the notion of really storing that energy until the very end. When you fully extend your elbows, you have released all of your energy. We haven't really talked about, like, say, a whole lot of, physics stuff in here, which we really don't. But have you heard of the concept called mechanical advantage? Mechanical advantage is what essentially simple tools allow us as, tiny humans to be able to, say, lift very large things quite easily. Take something like, say, a dolly, right? You put a 500-pound box on a dolly and you can push it pretty easy, right? Because you have generated or created a mechanical advantage for it. You've created a lever. You have pulley systems that allow you to pull things or move things up that you wouldn't be able to do so normally. The main point of that is you have a moment arm and you have a fulcrum. The movement itself creates what's known as torque. If you have a long moment arm, it makes it easier to do something, but you have to travel a longer distance. So that's why if I open a door, and you notice all those doors that have the push thing, they're always close, or relatively speaking, close to the handle. Why?
Easier than if you were trying to push the door from the horizontal.
Yeah, if I push a door close to the hinge, I have to travel the shortest distance, theoretically, because I only have to go from here to here, very small distance. But to open the door from near the hinge, I have to push with a much greater effort or provide much more force to get that door to actually move. If this door were really, really long, like say the whole wall, and I opened it from all the way down here, that would take the longest distance for me to travel to open that up, but it would be the easiest for me to do. With the swing, if you create a long moment arm, it's easier to do, but think about the force that you generate doing that, or that is required to do that. Whereas opening a door, you want to try to increase a moment arm to make it easier on you to open the door. With a swing, you want to decrease the moment arm because it's going to allow you to keep more energy or more potential energy focused until the very end. See how that kind of works? Long story short, elbows bent are best for you up through contact. If elbows are extended, you have lost force or you have lost energy. You notice the main thing with all mechanics is just the flow of energy. That's really all it is. The people who are the best at hitting, pitching, throwing are the ones that have the greatest conservation of potential energy and the quickest conversion of potential to kinetic energy. That's all it is. I mean, in a nutshell. Now, granted, that doesn't take into account, control and, ball placement and all that good stuff. But broadly speaking, if you are able to perfect your transfer of energy, you have won the war, kind of thing. Now, he's at ball contact here. Notice again that that front foot is about at roughly a 45-degree angle. His back foot is completely in the air and his heel is facing behind him. So his heel's facing the catcher. His back knee is starting to rotate, or it's almost completely rotated inward here. And his hips are now pretty much square to the ball. So he's a little bit closed off here still. So I would say that he is just slightly, slow to where he needs to be to generate max force. But this is also where you get the margin of error. When you look at, say, hitting the sweet spot of a ball, you have some margin of error with the barrel of the bat. It's much smaller with a wood bat, much bigger with an aluminum bat, but still, you have some margin of error there. So even though he's not mechanically perfect, he's good enough to the point where this ball is most likely going to be traveling a long way. Now he is at full elbow extension there. So it is not until that ball is well gone or well far away from the bat that he is essentially pointing at it with the end of his barrel. Now he's at full extension because now the point is that he wants to start slowing himself down. This is a very young Bryce Harper here. All right, he does something that is a little bit interesting. Watch his front knee. Right there. What's he doing there?
It's like cock back.
Yeah. So he's kind of turning his front knee inward. Why would you want to do that?
He's coiling.
And what does that mean?
It's like winding up rubber band to let it go.
Exactly. This can be problematic if you don't have good bat control. So what he's doing is staying closed a little bit longer and actually closing himself off even more to essentially coil up. He's loading much more weight on his backside to then explode to the front side. If he had poor bat control, an inside pitch would just be impossible for him to hit because he would take too much time to unwind or uncoil his position to be able to catch up to it. Because he does have good bat control, we know that, that's definitely not a problem for him. But all this is just to store more energy until later. You notice with his back foot is almost pointing a little bit outward. Is that good, bad, or indifferent?
I'd say different.
Why?
Because, well, for most people, like you say, generally want that back foot kind of pointed in, but if it works for Bryce, obviously he's doing something right.
Yeah. Now, you wouldn't ever recommend somebody to have their back foot, say, turn it like, say, a 45-degree angle. Like, you wouldn't want to be standing like this kind of thing, because that's just way too much distance you have to travel. But if it's slightly open, that's perfectly fine, because what does he have to do regardless of what his foot placement is? He has to turn it. He has to lift his heel and rotate. It may take him a fraction of a second longer to rotate because he has a longer distance to travel, well, slightly longer distance to travel, but he's doing that by design, because if I rotate my foot outward, my back foot outward, and then I rotate my front knee inward, to create that coil, I have to put more strain on my lower half. By externally rotating his back side, or his bat side leg, he's actually relieving some of the strain that's put on his lower extremity. So it allows him to coil and maintain more stored energy until that point at which he has to turn. So he's sacrificing time for energy storage. That's his big thing there. Because then I know it's kind of blink if you miss it here. When he goes, he's up and turned real quick. So we have that knee turned inward, and now you see how quickly he goes from that knee being internally rotated to now it's going to be externally rotated. So he's in a good process here of having most of his weight still on his back side. So you can clearly see, like, if this is his belly button, it's easy to see that his weight or his center of gravity is roughly right there. And then when he swings, now he brings his foot clear up. Does that matter? Why not?
Henry's already left that foot anyway.
Exactly. Because now you see how his energy has his center of gravity has now shifted to in front. I know it's a great line, but slightly in front of his body. It doesn't matter if this is up now, because it's done its job. It's rotated, it's provided an anchor, and then it's transferred the energy. That's all you need to do. And obviously, it lands at the end there, but
See how his front foot rolls over?
yes.
Why do you think that some guys do that and some guys don't do that? And why is it good or bad?
So what we're talking about here is when that foot lands, it lands essentially solid, flat. And then through the swing, you can see how that front foot starts to cave outward or rotate outward, where the arch of the foot is starting to become more visible, or the inside part of the foot is becoming more visible. And then when you get to near his follow through, you see how you can see pretty much underneath his cleat there. This is all a result of momentum. So what he's doing here, and you also notice as well where that ball at least looks like it's going. I would venture a guess to say that that ball is being pulled, mostly because he's hitting that very far in front of the plate. This here is really just that result of the amount of force he's generating relative to where his center of gravity is. Whenever your center of gravity isn't straight over the middle of your body, you're going to have a difficult time controlling your body. It's just how it works, because you don't have the same amount of, say, muscle mass over here that you do right here, kind of thing. It's like, why is it easier to balance on two legs than one leg, right? When he rotates, He's hitting, and the rotational force he's providing is what's causing that foot to come up. If he weren't swinging with as much of a force, there wouldn't be a need for that to happen. Even if he did, let's just say his center of gravity went all the way forward. There's not going to be a need for it. All that's doing is displacing that last bit of energy he has in that transfer from low half to upper half, or back to front there. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
That can be problematic, again, if you are doing this swing on, say, like an outside pitch, because this right here is a pull swing or a same field swing. He's making contact way out in front of the plate, which is where you want to. That's going to give him the max amount of power generation. Obviously, you're not going to have the same swing if you are swinging for an outside pitch, but if he took this pitch or this swing and you threw an outside pitch to him, he would be nowhere close to hitting it, because he would be so far out in front of the ball that he'd either top it or hit it like at the very end of the bat, or just miss it completely, because all his force generation is going towards right field. When you hit, you're not actually hitting straight. Like, that's not the goal. The goal is to create the most amount of rotational force or rotary force. If your goal is to hit straight, you would essentially be clubbing it, or, you know, chopping it like with an axe kind of thing. Same thing with pitching. Pitchers don't throw straight in front of them. You wouldn't be able to garner enough energy to create any meaningful force if you did that. So imagine if you threw a ball where I'm standing on the pitching mound and I do this. Straight forward. How fast do you think that's going to go? Relative to if I am perpendicular to home plate and I can rotate my whole body. Now, you see how much extra force I have. We'll talk more about that when we get into like pitching and control, because what you're trading off, really with both pitching and hitting, for force needs to be controlled by your accuracy. You know, how good is a 100-mile-an-hour pitcher if he can't find the strike zone?
That's a catch, he's on.
I mean, let's say you never threw a strike. I mean, that'd be terrifying if you're a batter. But how good would you be as a pitcher?
Probably wouldn't be a pitcher.
Probably not. Just ask Rick Ankiel. Threw 94 to 97, but couldn't ever find home plate after he got a case of the yips. However, you take a ball from the center field fence, he'll throw it on a dot to the third baseman. Go figure that one out. 60 feet, I can't even come close to the plate, but 300 feet, that's easy. When you generate rotary force, you're ultimately trying to throw a ball forward or hit a ball forward, but you're doing it like this. My body's going this way, the ball needs to go that way. You see how that can be problematic? It's a little bit difficult just to do that. You know, the whole, is that it? But that's where control comes into play, because what happens if I am off slightly with that rotary angle? What happens to my result?
Pretty big variation.
Yeah. I mean, you always hear about sports, as many sports are a game of inches. I mean, if you are off by an inch, so even if you change the point of contact by an inch, you have to think, how does that change the end result when you take it over 60 feet, 300 feet, that kind of thing? Widely varies. So that's the big problem. You need to work in a rotary force to generate the most amount of energy, but being in a rotary force means it's the most difficult to control. With all due respect, and I mean with all due respect, this is why pitching in softball is so much easier. Not only is the windmill motion, a lot easier on your arm or a lot less stressful on your arm, but aside from doing the closed hips to open hips, there is no internal and external rotation of your shoulder during the entire time. You're circumducting, that's it. You're making a circle. And yes, technically you have to do some internal and external rotation to do a circle. But it's not like in baseball where I have to externally rotate, internally rotate along with turning. I am turning, but then when I actually release, I'm releasing a straight ball, or I'm releasing straight on. There's virtually very little rotary force involved. It's also why you can't throw a softball that fast. Fastest pitchers in softball throw in like the low 70s. Fastest pitchers in baseball throw it in the low 100s. You are sacrificing force production for control. See how that works? All right, how are you all feeling about hitting?
I hate it.
Well, yeah, obviously you're a pitcher. I don't expect you to know all the biomechanics of this, but I do expect you to remember the basic fundamentals of what it requires to hit. If I were to show you a picture of, say, Bryce Harper hitting like this exact still image, would you be able to intelligently comment on what he's doing with each body part? That's kind of what I would expect. And then if I didn't have the ball here, would you think that this is a good or a bad result, and why? Or where do you think that ball ended up? Your biggest indicator of where the ball goes is where contact is made. Now, from a side view, it's going to be very difficult to judge if something goes, say, straight up the middle because you're lacking that depth perception to it. But in general, if you're hitting the ball in front of the plate, so here's his plate right here. Well, more like right here is the plate. If he's making contact here, where's that ball most likely going? Right field. Is going the same direction that he is batting. If he hits the ball right here, where do you think it's going? Yeah, somewhere between second base and shortstop, I would argue. What if he hits the ball here? Opposite field, yeah, good. All right, I want to switch gears now into running because that's the second half of this. So here's your real quick overview of gait analysis, and I posted this for you. When you talk about gait, you just talk about how you walk or your ambulation. So you have 7 or 8 phases of the gait motion. And all that this is that you are saying how, or what do you do from when one foot or one heel touches the ground to when that same heel touches the ground again. That's all you're talking about. When you're actually walking, first off, what's the difference between running and walking other than speed?
Sometimes when you're running, both feet are off the ground.
Yes, The only difference between running and walking is running has a period of flight. So both feet are off the ground. So the definition of running is when you have a gait such that both feet at some point during a gait cycle leave the ground. Practical purposes, that usually equates to about 5 miles an hour or faster. Now, world record speed walkers can walk at like 6.5 miles an hour. But, you know, those guys are, you know, they're anomalies, to say the least. If you're walking, and actually, stand up for me. I'm trying to not use your name so that, you know, I can post this online. That's why. Okay, so stand over there, and I want you to just walk normally. And what do you see on his feet, or about his feet when he's walking? Go ahead and walk back.
It goes heel to the front and then the same thing.
Perfect. Take your shoes off. Now, do the same thing. Now, what do you see?
The same thing without shoes on.
All right, go back. What do you...
Flatter. It feels more like it's not as big an emphasis of heel toe.
Why?
I don't know.
All right, hit your heel when you walk now with your shoes off. How does that feel?
Clunky.
Not right.
Mm-hmm.
Point is, you can go back now, thank you. The only reason you have a heel strike is because you wear shoes. That is the only reason. You will not hit your heel on the ground when you walk without shoes. So modern shoes, or well, whenever shoes were developed, changed fundamentally our gait because it made it so a heel strike was much more prevalent. Usually, the sole of the shoe at the heel is the thickest, provides the most amount of support. It allows us to have a heel strike. When you're pitching, does your front foot land on your heel or on your toe or somewhere in between?
You should land on the ball of my foot.
Roundabout, yeah. Why don't you want either of the other two ends?
Well, if you land on your heel, you're still going to have probably some of your force on the back leg. If you land on your toe, you're going to be lunging towards the bell blade.
Opposite. You had the right explanation, wrong pairing. Who's the lefty that pitches for you? He was the freshman All-American.
It was a righty.
I thought his name was it Preston?
Pearson.
Pearson?
Yeah, he's a righty.
Or? Oh, yeah, something like that. He's a righty? I thought he was lefty. Anyway, he lands slightly on his toe. And I've tried to point this out to absolutely like no fanfare at all. Because yes, if somebody is an All-American, usually they're doing something right. When you land on your toe, you encounter Newton's third law of motion, which says what?
Is that the 10 to stay in motion one?
That's the first law. Equal and opposite forces. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If I land on my toe, I am encountering the same force that I exert into the ground back up to me. When my toe points forward like that, or I land on my toe, I'm landing at this angle. So the ground pushes back up to me like this. This means that it's actually pushing me backward. So if you land on your toe, you're actually automatically losing force because it pushes you back, the ground pushes you back. So landing on your toe is the worst thing you can do as a pitcher. Similarly, it's the worst thing you can do as a hitter or even a runner, because anytime you hit with your toe or go too far forward, the ground pushes you back, which you don't want to do. You're going to lose energy that way. If I had to pick, you know, the two extremes, I'm going to land on my heel, because what was his gait like when he was walking with shoes on?
He eventually got to his toe.
Yeah, heel to toe, moving forward. When I land on my heel, now my momentum now carries me into that rolling forward. It's not as efficient as landing more flat-footed, but it still is better than landing on your toe because I'm not pushing myself backward. That makes sense? So yeah, if Pearson wants to get another 2 to 4 miles an hour on his fastball, he needs to just slightly tweak his mechanics. But what do I know? Okay, so very long-winded way to kind of point out what we actually do with our gait pattern. You have two phases in gait. You are either on the ground or in the air. You have to move backwards before you move forwards. So your legs create a pendulum. The only reason why you move backwards is to generate force. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to, say, go from flat-footed to pick your leg up to swinging it back and then going forward. When I'm actually walking, my back leg is already swung backwards, even though it's still on the ground, because my movement forward has made it so that this back leg goes backwards. So my hip goes into extension or goes behind me just because the rest of my body is propelled forward. I didn't actually move this leg. It's just I changed the displacement of the rest of my body, and this leg stayed where it was because it's attached to my body. It has to move backward. So you have to do that just to generate the swing forward. Where you'll see problems many times is if you have hip problems, you will see people swing with their gait, meaning that they will swing their leg around something instead of trying to walk over it. So instead of the normal lift your knee up in front, strike with your heel, same thing, they will be swinging around something to avoid having to use hip flexion, hip extension. Very common, you'll see in people that have hip injuries will do that swinging kind of gait. If you have, say, a hamstring injury, where is that going to affect you in this?
That's kind of like your hamstring and the glute is like the main muscle groups that like propel you forward, I'd say.
Yeah, kind of. Glutes and hamstrings are going to be most affected on the initial push-off and then at the landing into the roll. So my heel hits to when my toe or my foot's flat, hamstrings are going to work. And just stand up real quick. And I know it's going to be a little bit awkward, but try to hold on to one of your hamstrings and just kind of take a few steps and see where you feel it contract. Where is your body positioned when that hamstring contracts?
You're coming back and as soon as you land.
Yep. So the two ends of it. That's why most of the time when you see hamstring injuries occur, they occur at, like, say, the very beginning of the running motion, or they will happen when somebody is either trying to stop or when as soon as someone's hit their heel to the ground. So usually that's the two places you'll see it. How about your quads now? So I guess I should probably tell you, because I'm sure you're not, both experts in anatomy and physiology. Your hamstrings do two things. They do hip extension and they do knee flexion. So they will do everything to bring your leg behind you. Your muscles work in a pattern where form follows function. Essentially, wherever your muscle is positioned, that's the direction it moves. So you take your biceps. My biceps face forward, right? So what do they do for my arm? They move my arm forward. My triceps are behind me. What will they do for my arm?
Backwards.
Move it backwards, okay? Quads are in the front. They're going to move my leg forward. Quads do hip flexion and knee extension, okay? So general rule of thumb, wherever a muscle is positioned, that's the direction it moves, okay? So when I am moving my quads, where are my quads going to most move in the gait pattern?
From when the foot comes off the ground, going forward, right?
Yes. So quads activate when the toe is on the ground and heel is off the ground, up through the heel landing. So your quads are primarily responsible for that push off up through the land. If you are having a quad injury, it's going to be very difficult to lift your leg or your hip into flexion and to then extend your knee out. If you have a hamstring injury, it's going to be very difficult to bring your hip into extension and to flex your knee. Usually the knee flexion part isn't the part that's most affected by a hamstring. Hamstring injuries usually occur more towards your glute, which is going to be mostly affecting your hip. So this motion is most affected by hamstrings. This motion, most affected by quads. Does that make sense? All right, and this just shows you where, say, your foot pressure is going to be, which we kind of already talked about there. Different muscles that are used, the intensities of each, all that nice good stuff. Gait abnormalities, not a whole lot of stuff that you guys need to worry about, but it's just something there for you. So that's your gait analysis or gait lecture for the day. Now, let's look at, first off, people running. So this here is Usain Bolt running, so kind of a good runner. All right. When we watch him, oops. Make a little note here. So where that 2012 is, that's approximately where he is in flight, okay? He then lands here. How far of a distance do you think that is?
How tall is he?
He's like 6'5", I think.
Looks like about, maybe a little more than that, right, 7 feet.
It's a little bit misleading because you're not getting the total depth perception as you stay with him for the back. He's striding at close to double his height. Essentially, he's like jumping each stride he takes, kind of thing. He's doing like a long jump kind of thing. When you run, there is only two things that are meaningful in terms of, say, generating speed. You have stride frequency and stride length. If you want to get faster, you need to improve on one or both of those items. You either need to take more steps or you need to take longer steps. Now, this assumes the position that you aren't doing anything terrible with your mechanics elsewhere. Your arms are just a counterbalance. The only reason your arms work with you when you run is to counterbalance your legs. And your arms always go opposite of your legs. So when my right leg comes out, my right arm comes out. Counterbalance. I mean, if you try to walk like this, it's a little weird, right? So your stride frequency, how many steps you're actually taking. Your stride length, how long those steps actually are. There's a principle in like exercise physiology and really like plyometrics, and it's really applied to specifically running or really any explosive movement with your legs. And that's called amortization, which is essentially your transition time. When he's in the air, he's moving, right? When his feet are on the ground, is he moving?
It's like,
Let me phrase it a different way. When he's in the air, he is experiencing displacement. When his foot is on the ground, is he experiencing displacement?
I feel like he is with this like overall center of mass, but his foot isn't really moving, his foot's stationary.
Yeah, you're actually not displacing anything when your foot's on the ground. So yes, technically, if he's swinging this leg forward, he's displacing this leg, but his body stays where his foot is. So if you're planted, if you're touching the ground, you're not moving. You're only moving when you're in the air. Reasons to state that to run the absolute fastest, you want to spend the most time in the air horizontally, not vertically, and you want to spend the least amount of time on the ground. So if you were to look at the pressure marks of his feet, like if you were to actually look, say, like overhead on the track and look at his footprints and how much pressure each one took, you will see that it is a very soft landing and a very short landing. He spends the least amount of time with his feet on the ground out of anyone. Partly this is due to mechanics, partly it's due to his height, because the taller you are in general, the longer your stride length is going to be. Now, leg length can change greatly. So it's, just because say you're 7 foot tall doesn't necessarily mean that your legs are hugely tall. You can have a longer torso, but you get the idea. When you're actually running, you want to spend the least amount of time on the ground. Make sense? With his arms, you notice that his arms, and everyone's arms for that matter, are always staying approximately in a 90-90 fashion. So 90 degrees of elbow flexion, and then roughly 90 to 90 degrees, or a total of about 90 degrees of shoulder movement, both shoulder flexion extension. Stay about here. You also want to keep your arms in the same plane. So you want to keep your arms in what is known as the sagittal plane, or the plane that goes forward and backward. Cut your body in two sides. What happens if my arms go like this or like this?
Like your center of gravity shifts with it.
Exactly. What does that do to your overall mechanics?
If you're going with like as a sprinter, you're not necessarily going in a perfect straight line anymore.
Exactly. I mean, obviously you have to run in a straight line, but if my body is not directed in a straight line, I have to counterbalance that. I do that by becoming inefficient. This is why, if you're ever running, the majority of runners you see that do run incorrectly do this. This is the biggest error people make in running. So stand up real quick. And just start moving your arms like this, just straight forward. Now, cross your body. what do you feel with your hips?
Move.
They move, right? Which is what you don't want. Because which way are your hips moving?
Side to side.
Yes. And if I'm going side to side, more specifically they're rotating, but I'm moving side to side, where am I not going?
Forward.
Forward. And what's the goal of running?
Forward.
To go forward, right? So if you ever have to, like, say, run as punishment, where you have your arms over your head, you will notice that it's so difficult because you have to swing your hips pretty drastically to act as a counterbalance, because my arms are no longer counterbalancing me. So if I'm up here, I have to rotate much more to stay upright, stay unbalanced. This is why doing this is so hard, and why it's like, you know, you hold a bat over your head and run. It's such a difficult thing to do because you're so inefficient with the running itself. You guys can sit down. Good, thank you. So when we're running, we need to stay right here. You know, you ever seen that movie Hitch with Will Smith? He's teaching Kevin James how to dance. He's like, it's right here, just right here, keeping everything nice and tight. But if you go out, that's one of your biggest problems. It kind of goes without stating that when you are actually running with your legs need to be propelling straight forward. You may see people land with their feet kind of a little bit externally rotated like that, sometimes internally rotated. So if somebody has like a duck walk, you typically see the internally rotated hips. Or you can see somebody with the externally rotated hips that kind of do that. I know I'm over-exaggerating, but you get the idea. While both of those are ending your result going forward, they're being inefficient because not everything's in a straight line. So again, efficiencies make all the difference. All right, so now that you have that basic understanding of your mechanics of running, let's look at how we actually apply this to the baseball field. First off, when you're running in baseball, rarely ever are you doing a sprint-based pattern. You're not lining up straight on the starting blocks and going straight forward. That really doesn't happen. Softball does. Because in softball, you cannot take a lead. So in softball, every one of your bases, you take that sprinter's stance. Softball also operates on a much smaller field, but they have a lot more advantage in terms of being able to get into proper running mechanics quicker than someone playing baseball. Where baseball differs is that you have leadoffs, you can steal bases before the pitcher throws, that kind of thing. Like all things with baseball, rotary force becomes a big aspect of running, especially when we're running on the bases. Now, when we go from, say, hitting, obviously, when you go from hitting the ball after you make contact, and obviously you got to go and run, for all intents and purposes, you're just really running a straight sprint there. We're not going to focus so much on the mechanics of home to first in that regard. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week when we get into like base running strategy and things like that. But when I'm actually stealing a base, if you look, and I know the picture's a little bit blurry, what you see here for both of these runners is their foot placement is not neutral. Both of their feet are slightly pointing towards second base. Why?
When they do start to run towards second, they can more easily turn their hip to go forward.
Yeah. You're speeding up the process of getting into forward running. You're shortening the distance you have to travel. If I rotate my feet out, so if second base is over there and I am getting my lead, if my feet are rotated out slightly, it's less movement I have to make when I actually turn and run. Another common thing you'll see, and it's a little bit hard to distinguish in this, is the front leg or the right leg, always the right leg, never left leg, is dropped back slightly. So it's not in alignment. If I were standing with my feet facing forward, it would look kind of like this, where I have like almost a split stance. And again, that is just to allow more clearance. Because if this foot is dropped, it has to go already that direction. If I'm here, I would have to move it out anyway. So I'm dropping it back to just cut that process down. Because when I then rotate to start running, now this foot is where it needs to be, as opposed to me needing to make an extra movement to do that. It's all about just cutting that time. So the major difference with baseball sprinting versus, like, say, track sprinting is the starting point. With baseball sprinting, you have that rotary or rotational start, as opposed to track, you have just a straight start. So again, that is just purely for the purposes of being more efficient with your mechanics, getting closer to your ideal running movement quicker. What's the downside to that?
It's a little longer going back the other way.
Yeah, and why is that bad?
I get picked off.
There you go. So because we have to make the game, you know, fair-ish, a pitcher can pick you off. There actually is no statistic called a pick-off. It is always a caught stealing. So that's a fun fact of the day. If my feet are pointed in this direction, they're not pointed back at first base. I am trading my ability to quickly get back to the bag for a head start going to the next bag. If you ever looked at here it is. The Dave Roberts steal from the 2004 ALCS. You look at that. I mean, that is all or nothing right there. You know, he's up against Mariano Rivera, and the entire world knows he's stealing, right? I mean, he's already got his back leg dropped completely. His back leg's like this. He's like already running, kind of thing. And I know Rivera throws, like, tries to pick him off a bunch of times. But yeah, he really, you know, goes all out there. I've seen him go closer to the cut before, and that's pretty impressive when you can do that. But most all of his weight is getting ready to be shifted towards the next base. So the big problem is that you've got that potential to get picked off there. When I actually go to run, you'll notice that the first movement you make is hip rotation. So when I'm moving to go to the run, I have to essentially take my arms and swing them over to rotate my hips. At the same time, my legs are rotating, my hips are rotating along to make my legs rotate. But you notice with both of these runners here, their right arm comes way out here. And why does that happen?
time to get the hips open.
Yeah, I mean, it's a violent motion you're making there. You know, are you like, you know, taking your nice time, making this nice little turn to usually stroll into second base? No, especially for stealing, that is a violent, explosive movement. So when I actually go to steal, I am ripping essentially my arm out here to get my hips to blow forward, to go straight forward and start to run. It makes my first step or first couple steps really inefficient, but it's the quickest I can do or can go to create that rotary force or rotary movement and start propelling myself forward. So you have to be, just by design, you have to be inefficient to start. One of the things that will happen to when you start running is you'll notice that their body position changes quite drastically. All right, here we go. So watch their trunk and like their back specifically. Okay, how are these guys positioned right now?
Almost falling forward.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to make them stop right there, they would fall flat on their faces. All of their weight, or virtually all their weight, is out in front of them. Which again, you have to because you need to start building up momentum. So, I mean, you have to do that. What would be the problem with running like this? Like if I just ran the whole way like this?
It's a little slower, like being so far out front, you cut your stride length.
Yeah, this is something that essentially is going to be either leading into a slide, like especially a dive forward, or starting off the starting blocks. Because right now, that doesn't look unlike starting a sprint in a 100-meter dash, right? You don't start on the starting blocks or keep that same starting blocks mentality middle of the race, right? How should your body position change as you keep running?
You're more vertical.
Yes. The whole reason why you are forward like this to start is because it's going to help with launching off your initial steps off your lower half, so you get that launch to go, and you reduce drag. When you're upright, so if I went from like say here to straight here, I wouldn't have enough push off from my leg to get me started fast, and I would automatically create a higher level of drag because I have more surface area shown here. Less surface area here. I'm more of like a bullet kind of thing, as opposed to here on a wall. Walls are pretty good windbreakers, right? Bullets, not so much. But I can't stay like that. You know, this is like pressing the turbo button in what, Madden or whatever you know, crazy kids play these days. You hit the, you know, the turbo button, and yes, you get a brief jump or a brief burst of speed, but then you slow down. So that's what's happening here. It's very good for that brief burst of speed to get you going, but you have to go to upright running if you want to achieve at or close to your max speed. Most likely, you're not going to reach, or you may just barely reach your max speed while stealing a base. It's just too short. If you have, you know, bases are 90 feet apart, you take roughly an 8 to 12 foot lead. So you're looking at, let's say 80 feet you're running, actually. 80 feet is about 27 yards. In 27 yards, you're not gonna hit your max speed, or you may just be hitting it. But by the time you're about to hit it, you have to slow down. Because why? Yeah, exactly. So virtually everyone, now granted, the quicker you hit your max speed, the more functionally efficient you're going to be in terms of a base runner. But usually the worse off you are as an overall sprinter. You don't want to hit your max speed too early as a sprinter, like especially if you're running a 100-meter dash. Why would you want to continually increase your speed up too close to the end of it?
That way you get like a strong finish.
It's all about fatigability. When you're at your 100% max, like full on out, you're gonna last seconds maybe. You don't last long. You know, even think about how long do you think you could, say, run on a 10-mile-an-hour treadmill at a 20% incline?
Not long.
Yeah, the best person I've ever seen do that, and you have to use a special treadmill with like harnesses and stuff so you don't, you know, fall and bust your face, did a 12-mile-an-hour run on a 22% incline for 15 seconds. Like that's rough. Now, when you're talking about, say, speed for like, say, a major league player, typically you're looking at the high teens, low 20s. I've seen Mike Trout get up to like 22 to 23 miles an hour when he's running in the outfield. But anyways, with a base runner, especially if you're running one single base, the quicker you can get to max speed, the better, because you only have a very short distance to travel. The problem with it is you have to stop. So you have to force yourself to slow down. Even if I'm running, say, first to third, I still have to slow down or else I'm gonna run into left field, you know? I have to, you know, take my turn, go around, all of that. Anytime I'm not running in a straight line, anytime I'm not keeping my body straight, I'm becoming less efficient, so I lose speed. So I have to slow down. Even when I slide, the whole purpose of sliding is so that you can maintain max speed longer and then immediately stop. People that slide into a base, like slide into first base, are dumb. No other way to put it. You're slowing yourself down artificially. Now, I will say that with the caveat that if you're sliding to avoid a tag or to avoid a body, yeah, that's a good idea. But if you're just sliding to beat a throw, it's stupid. You're making yourself slower. All right, and then here I'll show you the full thing. I think they show this full thing here. All right, I just want to see him steal the base. Come on. All right, here we go. All right, he's still a little bit forward. And now, you know, he's completely upright. Now, maybe this is a little bit bad because catcher dropped the ball, but still, at the same time, you'll notice how when he runs like this with his trunk. So you slowly bring that upright. Now you can't obviously hold base runners to the same accountability mechanically as you would, like, say, an Olympic sprinter, because look at his arms and watch his arms as he runs. What's he doing with his arms? Especially that right arm.
A little bit of crossover.
Yeah, it's actually kind of strange to see it because he's almost running perfect with his left arm, but then cutting over with his right arm. Kind of like that. Either way you look at it, it's going to create inefficiencies there. Now, when you're actually running bases, You notice here we have this bit here. What is this?
The runner's lane.
Is the runner's lane. And what is that used for?
Not sure.
That is the place that the runner is allowed to be. The runner gets full reign over that. It's roughly 3 feet wide, so it also is supposed to simulate the base path. But the runner has the right to this lane. If a fielder were to interfere with that, it would be obstruction, and the runner would at least be awarded first base. Where the rule becomes a little bit tricky is the fielder has the right to field the ball, but the runner has the right to the base path. So when those two intersect, it usually doesn't end well. This is both to protect the runner and to protect the fielder, because the runner is not supposed to then deviate out into here, because first baseman will be standing right here on the base, and you don't want the runner to run into him there. That's not particularly fair or good. So you keep the runner to the outside of it. This base path exists everywhere. You have 3 feet on either side. If you deviate out of that, you should be out as a runner. The exception to it is when you are, say, like rounding a base, or when you are advancing bases without being actively pursued, kind of thing. So everyone knows that when you run to first base, you are allowed to run through the bag. It's the only base you're allowed to do it other than home. You run through the bag so that you can give yourself time to stop afterward without penalty. Well, let's say you run through the bag and you end up where the umpire is. And this throw from whomever goes down into here. What are you going to do as the runner? Most likely.
Look to see if you have an opportunity to take another base.
You're going to run to second base. There you go. Well, I'm all the way out here. How do I stay in a base path if I'm all the way out here? Do I have to run back there and then go forward? No, I go straight from here to there. When you are running to the next base, your base path is created by the runner themselves. Because I started out here, my base path becomes now, instead of if this is first and this is second, it's not this, it's from here to here. So now my base path is in a straight line, but from my starting point to second base. If I were to, say, get in a rundown, and I went back to the original baseline, I should be called out because I've left my originally intended or originally designated base path. Does that kind of make sense? Now, if I'm, say, rounding second base and going to third base, many times people round second base and they can maybe come clear all the way out to here and then circle all the way in. Why are you not out when you do that?
Because like you said, you're not being actively pursued.
Exactly. All right, we're pretty much out of time, but last real quick thing I wanted to mention here, and we'll go over this again, is this stolen base attempts versus the total time it takes to do it. The amount of time it takes to get a ball to second base to try to throw a runner out is called a combined time. The combined time is the total time it takes for a pitcher to deliver the ball and plus the catcher's pop time, or the time from the catcher catching the ball to the time the middle infielder catches the ball that's being thrown. Obviously, the slower that time or the longer that time, the worse off you are. The best catchers have a under 2-second pop time, with the best being in the 1/8 to 1/9. Approximately every 1/10 of a second is about 2 feet worth of distance. So the worst catchers in the world versus the best catchers in the world in terms of like Major League Baseball are really only differentiated by approximately 2 to 6 feet of total time. Very, very minimal in terms of what you're actually seeing. But we'll go over more of that next week. But yeah, that's everything I got for you here. So thank you all for getting through that with me and for your great participation. And then I will see you all next week.